everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Kylie if this is your first time here, and today we are here to discuss Scream 4. Scream 4. Scream 4. Scream 4. Scream 4. Scream 4 came out in 2011. It received only a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes, and here's the synopsis. 10 years have passed, and Sidney Prescott, who has put herself back together thanks in part to her writing, is visited by the ghost-faced killer on the first leg of her book tour in her hometown of Woodsboro. If you're new here, I do start out with some fun facts on the movie, then I do my spoiler-free thoughts, and then I get into a spoiler-filled breakdown. Also, before I get into things, so on Friday that will be my year anniversary of posting horror content on this channel, and I'm so close to hitting 3,000 subscribers, and it would just mean the world to me if you guys told your friends, told your co-workers, told your grandmas, tell everybody you think would have even the slightest interest about Haunted Hippie. Or just leave a like or subscribe to my channel, click that notification bell, all of that really helps me out too. This was the very last film directed by Wes Craven before he died of brain cancer in 2015. But he lived to 76 years old and he left an amazing legacy behind him. At the time of this installment, this was the only horror franchise to have all of the main characters as well as the director return for all of the sequels. Courtney Cox and David Arquette, as I have mentioned in videos prior, met on the set of Scream and they got married in 1999. But by this time, they had filed for separation back in 2010, and so there was a little bit of tension on set, but everyone says that like they were perfectly professional. Then they later got officially divorced in May of 2012. And I think that they actually worked around this well. I don't know if this was intentional, but in the movie, Dewey and Gail were having some issues as well, so like it worked. Despite being the most recognizable face of the Scream franchise, Ghostface doesn't appear on any of the North American posters for this movie. For the first time in the franchise, a CGI knife was added later in post-production. Wes Craven wanted to avoid using prop knives, even though I believe they had done so in the past 3 movies. And I didn't even notice, I think it looks really good. And also you can definitely tell that they're using prop knives in the previous movies, at least definitely in the first one. Those knives look super dull, so it's kind of corny. Anthony Anderson stars in this movie as Deputy Perkins, and he actually stars in a bunch of the Scary Movie movies. And those are the spoof movies of a bunch of major franchises, namely Scream. Emma Roberts was the shortest of all of the cast members, standing at only 5 feet 2 inches tall. She has such a commanding presence on screen, usually like no matter what her role is, specifically in American Horror Story Coven, and I'm trying to envision if I ever met her what that would be like because I'm almost 5'11", so I'm a solid 8 inches taller than her. Oh, that would be so funny. I'd have to like lean down for a picture. But because she was so small, she had to wear 3-inch lifts on her boots because for some reason they just wanted her to be able to stand as tall as everyone else. This is also one of 3 movies where Emma Roberts appears with one of the leads of Friends. Here she worked with Courtney Cox, obviously, and then in Hotel for Dogs she worked with Lisa Kudrow, and then she worked with Jennifer Aniston in We're the Millers. Ashley Greene was considered for the role of Jill Roberts, and that would have been weird. Scout Taylor Compton from Rob Zombie's Halloween also auditioned for Jill. And oh my god. One of the most disgusting people on the internet, Shane Dawson, auditioned for the role of Robbie Mercer in this movie. I forgot that he was like trying to be a real actor for the longest time and he like made his own movie and it ended up being the worst thing that any of us ever saw. And like the only reason that most of us have seen it is probably because we watched Nick DeRamio and he covered Not Cool on his channel. Please watch that if you haven't. He's hilarious. He's one of my favorite movie commentators and he dives deep into a lot of Shane Dawson content. Anyways, I am the queen of taking tangents. Hilary Duff was also briefly attached to this project for an unspecified role. Lucy Hale was also cast in this movie without an audition, and that makes perfect sense to me because back in 2011 she was working on Pretty Little Liars. She was hot shit. And for my last fun fact, they reveal that Woodsboro has a stab marathon every single year. This is just like the town Texarkana, which features the town that dreaded sundown annually, which is about real life murders in that town. And the town that dreaded sundown I think is also referenced in Scream because they impose a curfew. Okay, so getting on to my spoiler-free thoughts on the movie, I think that this is probably going to be pretty brief because I have more that I want to talk about in the spoiler section. And this movie is also not nearly as deep as Scream 3. That video ended up being a lot longer because there was just a lot of commentary to unpack. But Scream 4, so this is a movie that I've been told by some of my subscribers is slightly polarizing. From the people that I talk to, like my horror friends, my fellow horror community that I speak to, everyone loves Scream 4, but some of you guys, my subscribers, have mentioned that this is not one of the most well-liked in the franchise. But I can't imagine that it's going to be as controversial as Scream 3. But I've been wrong about these things before, like especially with my review of Cult of Chucky. A lot of you guys could not believe that I found enjoyment in that film. But is this movie as strong as the first sequel? Maybe. I feel so back and forth with this one because I feel like the second movie, the first sequel, was probably better made, but then this one is just so much fun. But I don't think that this is the best one, and it's most definitely not the most well made. A lot of the shots in this movie, you'll notice, especially when they're outdoors, are extremely overexposed for some reason. Like whoever was doing the lighting on this movie obviously had no idea what they were doing for outdoor shots, and even some of the indoor shots are kind of gross. Even my boyfriend Mason, who knows nothing about making films, like he's a kinesiology major, he was like, why is everything glowing in this scene? And especially in the outdoor shots, but in a lot of the movie, a lot of the characters look face-tuned, and it's quite a conundrum why the fourth installment in a franchise looks like it's the one with the lowest budget. Yeah, I just looked it up and oh my good god. The first Scream movie had a budget of 15 million, Scream 2 24 million, and then Scream 3 and 4 had budgets of $40 million. So there really is no excuse for this movie looking the way that it does, but it is a pretty minor setback because the movie is still pretty good. And that's kind of gonna be my crutch for the entirety of this review, is that this movie is really fun. Like, just remember, it's really fun, but there are a lot of negative notes on it. Because a lot of parts of this movie are pretty ridiculous and they feel a lot more cliched rather than like just trying to make commentary on cliches. But given what this franchise is, a lot of it feels very intentional, and so it's still really easy to enjoy. For example, some of the writing is pretty questionable. You'll probably find a lot of the characters to be really annoying, but for the most part they're actually really likable, and I think that for the first time since the first movie, this is the most that I have liked a Scream cast. And also because in this movie they're making remake commentary, every core character has somewhat of a doppelganger in this movie, but I'm gonna get into those and my thoughts on all of them and the new characters in the spoiler section. And also because they're talking about remakes in this movie, a lot of the commentary is very fluffy, none of it's like very deep or about the movie making process, which I think is good because it definitely got back to the roots of the first movie rather than Scream 3, which just had, oh goodness, the self-referential nature of that movie was out of hand. That being said though, a lot of the plot points in this movie feel like a rehashing of things that we've already seen. So it's not the most creative work of this franchise in my opinion, but it was an accurate portrayal of what happens when we try to revive franchises from the dead. Overall though, I still think it's a great movie and it's a lot of fun because it doesn't seem like it's trying to take itself that seriously. And I feel like in the first one, even though it was more of a dark comedy and they were just making commentary on slashers in general, it still had a more serious tone to it, whereas the tone has completely changed in this one to the point where things that happen in this movie don't feel very consequential. And I say that because usually the death scenes in the Scream franchise are not the strongest, and a couple of them in this movie do kind of add some dramatic flair, but for the most part they don't really have like any emotional resonance. Like someone's best friend will die and then they'll be totally fine in the next scene. But again, you have to give them a pass because they're making commentary. They're not super concerned with your emotions, I don't think. They're just trying to surprise you at this point. And despite the fact that it takes place in 2011, it's a modern film, it still feels like it has a 90s vibe to it. And I'm not totally sure why. Maybe it's just the fact that there were landlines, but I mean, at my house, we still had a landline up until I think 2012. So I'm not sure what that is, but for whatever reason, I feel like for Scream 5, it's gonna be really, really hard to maintain that 90s vibe. But I hope that they can, because that's one of my favorite parts of these movies. And I know it kind of sounds like I'm harping on this movie, but this is literally one of my favorites in the franchise. It's one of my favorite movies because it is so fun and so easy to revisit. So if somehow you still haven't seen this movie, just go in expecting to have fun, and you will. Don't try to take it too seriously. But I am gonna get on to my spoiler-filled I'm gonna get on to my spoiler-filled fun facts now. So I watched some of the deleted scenes for this movie, and in one of them, Dewey explains to Gail that Neil Prescott, Sydney's father, has passed away since appearing in Scream 3, and this is the first time Sydney has returned to Woodsboro since his death. Not super consequential, as I mentioned in my last review of Scream 3, I was like, why did they even really bother bringing Sydney's dad back? It's not like anyone was really worried about him. But I thought it was interesting. If you're a Scream fan, I thought that would be some nice little canon you would like to know, that Sydney's dad is dead. In an early draft of the script, apparently Gail and Dewey were supposed to have a baby, but they quickly changed this idea because they realized that having a baby on set would make shooting this movie impossible. And yeah, honestly, whenever you can, you really should try to not write children or babies into your script. It's a logistical nightmare, especially with all the rules that there are with having children on set and everything. Ugh, labor laws. Also, Dewey has lost his limp in this movie. It's just completely gone, and it's not explained on screen, but apparently his character had been going to physical therapy for years and years. So no more limpy dimpy Dewey Meister. I'm on one today, apologies folks. In the opening scene, Rachel and Chloe are criticizing Ghostface for using Facebook as a method to stalking his victims. This is a nod to yet another abandoned idea from the original script in which Ghostface was going to stalk his victims via Facebook. I'm so glad they abandoned that. Like, honestly, I mean, it's cool, like it would have been a new idea and they wouldn't have had to rely on the telephone, but that is just such a staple of this franchise at this point, they probably couldn't do that. And also, I don't really like the social media angle of it. I don't want them to bring that into this franchise. And for my last fun fact, all the films with two killers have something in common. One of them always has a vendetta against Sydney particularly. So in the first movie it was Billy Loomis, and then in the second movie it was Debbie Loomis, and then in this movie it was Jill. And then all of those main killers have their accomplice who is just doing it for the thrill of things. So in the first movie that was Stu, the second movie it was Mickey, and then in this movie it was Charlie, who is played by Rory Culkin. Fun fact, he is Macaulay Culkin's brother. Okay, so as always, I think I usually start by talking about the opening of the movie, so here we go again. I remember the first time I saw this movie, I thought that the opening was so fun. Like, I just thought it was hilarious and I really enjoyed it. This time around, I thought it was kind of just cliched and goofy, but I still really enjoyed it because of the actresses that make a guest appearance. Kristen Bell is amazing. I love her in The Good Place. Watch that show if you haven't. It's on Netflix. And I'm so happy that she had a moment in this franchise. And like I've mentioned before briefly, I mentioned this in my hits and misses of 2020 TV shows and movies. I mentioned that for whatever reason, the combination of Lucy Hale and cheesy, slightly bad horror movies is my weakness. It doesn't make sense to me because the horror movies that she's in are so bad, but it's one of my favorite recipes. It doesn't make any sense. And I didn't make note of this, but I think that she was originally supposed to have a larger role, but she was filming Pretty Little Liars at the time, so she settled for this like guest appearance. Anyways, so this opening doesn't really make a ton of sense to me because we have a movie in a movie in Scream 4, a movie in a movie in a movie. But the opening of Stab 7 is Stab 6, so I'm just confused. Was there ever a Stab 6, or did they skip over Stab 6 so they could have that type of moment in Stab 7? Or is Stab 7 technically Stab 6? Or was it a combination of the two entries so it went like Stab 4, 5, 6, 7? The more sense you try to make of it, the less sense it actually makes. All I know is that it was fun, and I thought it was a fun opening for this movie. And I thought it was appropriate because they're making remake commentary, they're making commentary on when franchises kind of run themselves into the ground, so it worked. Anyways, let's talk about our returning characters. Kicking it off with Dewey, he's finally not the worst. I don't like him, he's still not a good character, but at least he's not the worst. Because you can kind of understand his motivations in this movie. Like, I hate the fact that he's putting Gail down and not letting her help and stuff, but it is for the benefit of her safety. But again, even though they're married and like after everything they've been through, you would think that he would kind of want her as his partner, but like it's understandable why he wouldn't. So of course, in keeping with her character, Gail pursues the story anyways. And speaking of Gail, I really liked her character arc in this movie. Seeing their house and how she and Dewey lived together was really nice. I thought that was like some good fan service, and seeing that she had been really successful. But now she was sort of in a funk, and seeing Sydney's success, she was obviously kind of jealous and she wanted to get back into the swing of things. I like the process that she went through because she was like, I want change in my life and my husband is stinky, so I'm gonna take matters into my own hands. Also, might I point out that if I was stuck in this town married to Dewey, there is no way that I would last 10 years. I would have walked into the nearest forest and become a river nymph. I would also like to point out, as I did earlier, that their relationship relationship troubles in the movie somewhat mirror their real lives, which I think is really interesting. It definitely brought more realism to their character relationship, because the reasoning why they got divorced as relayed to us by like drama magazines and stuff is apparently the fact that David Arquette wanted to keep trying to make the relationship work, but he wasn't willing to grow up, is what Courtney Cox said. So it was like she was married to a real life Dewey, basically. Because Dewey never goes through a character arc. He is always the same, always an idiot. And honestly, I see that in so many of my friends' relationships. I'm like, girl, he is treating you like his mom and not like his partner. How have you guys been together for so many years? Anyways, let's discuss Sydney. I love her character development too. I love that they reinvented her while still making it feel like a really solid continuation from where we left off with her in Scream 3. And also at this point with the killers coming back, she really came at it from a much mature stance. Like, she did not have time for this Ghostface bullshit anymore. In this movie, she will run straight up the stairs after the killer, no weapon in sight, just vibes, just brazen confidence to get her through a confrontation with a literal murderer. One thing that I'm kind of glad that they didn't do, but I still would have found it funny, is if they gave her some sort of Daphne arc. Because do you remember in the first live action Scooby-Doo movie when Daphne is like, I've transformed my body into a dangerous weapon, and she turned into like a pro street fighter? I would have thought it would be kind of funny if Sydney went through something similar, but I'm glad she didn't, because that would have been just really cliched. So moving on now to the new characters and the Doppelgangers. Marley Shelton plays Deputy Hicks in this movie, and she is obviously the new Dewey. We also talked about her recently because I reviewed the movie Valentine from 2001, and she is the lead in that movie. But her character in this movie was annoying as hell. And I'm not sure if she was supposed to be a lovable idiot like Dewey, but just like Dewey, she felt very arbitrary and not necessary at all for the plot. I get that they were making remake commentary, so everybody sort of had to have their remake version of themselves, but she didn't do much except for bother Gail. A lot like Dewey, actually. Mason even said, and I quote, "That bitch is annoying, write that down." And I did for some reason. Another relation she has to Dewey is that she survives for seemingly no reason. She got fully shot, but then, oh, psych, she was wearing a vest. And maybe this was a nod to the last movie in which Dewey kept repeatedly shooting that guy in the chest, and they were like, the head, Dewey, the head, because he is so stupid. So I was like, okay, fair enough, but why couldn't she have died instead of Kirby? Am I right? Let's talk about that. I do think that Kirby possibly could have survived, and given the fan reception of her, I think they will bring her back for Scream 5, but let's not get into that. It's my opinion that she was the new Randy. Other people think that she is just like one of the girls that's supposed to represent Tatum, and I realize there are two guys in the film club that easily could represent Randy, but I think Kirby is the strongest new Randy. She is also undoubtedly one of the best new characters, and I can't believe that they killed her off. It's like they didn't learn their lesson with Randy in Scream 2. Although, like I said, maybe this will be their redemption arc and they will bring her back for Scream 5. Stay tuned, I am gonna make a Scream 5 bingo card of all my predictions, so subscribe if you haven't already. Moving on though, so Emma Roberts plays Jill, that is obviously the new Sydney. I thought she did a pretty good job, and honestly I was rooting for her up until the twist because I admittedly did not see it coming. And I actually found her motivation to be pretty believable. She wanted to be a famous final girl, and honestly, wouldn't you want that too if you saw that your family member had gone through all this and gotten super famous and she literally couldn't die for some reason? You might also develop an invincible superiority complex. I also love how with the very ending, behind the scenes, everything is so twisted and she's laying dead in the hospital, and then the media is reporting on her and giving her all the fame that she wanted. And I love that that's where we end the film, because another one of my predictions is that the commentary for the next movie is gonna be on the media. Okay, I have to stop spoiling my Scream 5 bingo card. So let's talk about Gail, whose doppelganger I guess would be Sydney's publisher, but I feel like it's kind of a loose connection, especially because she ends up being a relatively useless character. She's kind of just there to represent Gail from the first movie, and then she just helps the body count be a little bit higher. So I think it's kind of a bummer that Gail didn't get a more consequential doppelganger, but Gail is also definitely one of a kind, so I don't blame Kevin Williamson for that. So her, along with some of the other new characters, were also pretty inconsequential, like the film club nerds, except that one of them turned out to be a super salty incel that got betrayed by his partner in crime. I guess they also had to do that too, because in keeping with Scream 2, one of the partners had to betray the other one. And I honestly liked the twist. I liked that Jill was the killer. I thought she had had probably the best motivation out of everybody there. So I thought that twist too with her betraying him was good. I didn't see that coming either, even though I probably should have. Along with that, one of my favorite parts of the movie is when she is beating herself up. And as stupid as that was and as over the top they went with that scene, like I said, this movie is just a lot of fun. And I guess this movie also is kind of trying to show how bad remakes usually are. The intention of Scream movies can be a little bit confusing sometimes because it's a little bit hard to differentiate what is poor writing and what is just commentary on other franchises. And I feel like the commentary thing is just, it's such a crutch because anytime that you say, oh, that is kind of cliched, the writers can be like, well, yeah, duh, because we're making commentary on it. That, of course, is said with all the love in the world for Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson because I do still love this movie. Like I said, it just seems like they made a lot more cliched missteps than we're actually making commentary on cliches because, like, in the first movie, they break free of a ton of tropes and this movie kind of just follows most of them to a T. So all of that being said, I think I'm gonna have kind of a difficult time with my ranking just because I appreciate every single one of these movies for different reasons and they're all good. None of the Scream movies are bad. I guess that's debatable for some people with Scream 3, but I still love that movie. But we'll see. Hopefully you stay tuned. Also be sure to check out my Patreon for extra bonus content and early access. My social media and my vlog channel will also be linked down below. I do a lot of daily vlogging if you're interested in that kind of thing. I just take a lot of walks and do a lot of relaxing time lapses of me cleaning and whatnot usually. So I hope you check it out. I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!